It was a late evening on February 8th, 2017, in Grove City, Ohio. 21-year-old Ohio State student Reagan Tokes was just finishing her shift at the Boda restaurant. Following a long night on the job, she collected her belongings and made her way outside. At about 10 that evening, she exited the building and walked toward her car, which was parked in the lot behind the restaurant. This was a familiar routine, something she'd done countless times after clocking out for the night. And every week, like clockwork, she would fire off a short text to her family down in Florida, just a quick note to confirm she was safe. "I'm home." But on this particular night, that message never arrived. At roughly 10:30, her sister sent her a text. The message showed as delivered, but there was no response. Her father started calling over and over. For 4 solid hours, the phone just kept on ringing. Then, sometime around 2 in the morning, the signal suddenly vanished. The following morning, Reagan was a no-show at her lecture. Her dorm room was vacant. The bed was perfectly made. Her bag was just sitting on the floor. A short while later, the police received a call. A person walking by reported the discovery of a young woman's body near the entrance of Scioto Grove Park. She was found lying unclothed in the snow, without a phone or any identification. All she had on her was a small, circular tattoo and a delicate necklace. A few hours later, investigators posed a simple question to Reagan's roommates. Did she have a tattoo like this one? And in that instant, the horrible truth dawned on everyone. But the most terrifying chapter was still to come, because authorities would quickly uncover something chilling. That night, Reagan hadn't just gone missing. She had been taken, forced to drive from one ATM to another, and she spent the final moments of her life pleading to be spared, saying, "I just want to live." All right, everyone, let's just hit pause for 1 second. I'm genuinely curious where all of you are tuning in from. So, I'd like to ask you something really fast. Let me know what city you're in as you watch this, and what the current time is where you are. Thank you so much for taking a moment to answer that. Go on and put it in the comments. And having said that, let's get back to the story. Grove City, Ohio. What was once a large farming town, Grove City has now become a place people love to explore, especially those who appreciate the outdoors. The area is steeped in history and has a rich culture. Honestly, it has the vibe of one of those quiet American towns where life has a more relaxed pace. A short drive from the city, you'll find several state parks where people can go hiking, kayaking, or enjoy the local paintball fields. In the autumn, families even go out for some pumpkin picking. You know, that quintessential seasonal tradition. And only about 15 minutes from there is Ohio State University, one of the biggest universities in the nation, with a student body of around 60,000. And in 2017, one of those students was 21-year-old Reagan Delaney Tokes. Her family had not long ago relocated from Ohio down to Florida for work, but Reagan chose to stay behind in Columbus, Ohio. She wanted to complete her education at Ohio State, the one and only university she ever saw herself attending. In fact, it was the single school she submitted an application to. Her father, Toby, had taken her to a football game there when she was just a little girl, and from that day on, her mind was set. She knew that's where she was meant to be. She was so sure she'd be accepted that she told people she was already in before the official letter was even sent. And then, it finally came. She was in. After that, she dove headfirst into college life. Reagan was a psychology major and already had a well-defined plan for her life after college. Her goal was straightforward: work for a handful of years after she graduated and, down the line, open up her own private practice. Her family was her entire world. She was incredibly close to her dad, Toby, her mom, Lisa, and her younger sister, Mackenzie, who she playfully called Gigi. They were in touch multiple times a day, and it didn't matter how swamped Reagan was with her studies, she always carved out time for them. Her mother often recalled how Reagan was a bundle of energy from the time she was an infant, always eager to tackle something new. But what was truly remarkable about her, even from a young age, was her sense of compassion. Reagan always had a way of noticing the people on the sidelines, the ones who seemed like they could use a friend. Lisa once shared a memory of having to pull the car over so Reagan could gently move tiny insects off the road so they wouldn't be crushed. She just couldn't bear to see any living thing in distress. The Tokes family was deeply involved with their church, and over school breaks, Reagan frequently went on mission trips with church groups. Friends described her as fun-loving, a bit of a free spirit, super chatty, and just a complete social butterfly. She was also a huge sports fan. Reagan played on the varsity tennis and lacrosse teams, so, with all the things Grove City had to offer, it truly felt like the perfect environment for her. She shared an off-campus place with 4 other girls, Jackie, Madison, Kirsten, and Stephanie. It was pure chance they were placed together, but they hit it off instantly and quickly became inseparable friends. A few of them were even co-workers at the same neighborhood restaurant. Reagan, however, had been having a rough time lately. She and her boyfriend, Jake, had come to a mutual decision to end their relationship. Reagan's main focus was on finishing her degree with the highest marks possible, so they both concluded it was the most sensible choice. They reasoned that the smartest thing to do was to concentrate on school without any relationship pressures. As for the future, well, they decided they would just let life unfold and see what happened. Her roommates knew the breakup was tough on her, but Reagan and Jake were still in constant contact, and both insisted they would always be best friends. With her final year of college drawing to a close, Reagan even shared on social media how her dad had already gotten a lovely frame for her diploma. It was obvious this was a deeply significant time for her, as if everything she'd been striving for was finally within reach. By February of 2017, graduation was just months away, and she was swamped, racing to get everything done before the semester's end. On the evening of February 8th, Reagan left her apartment and headed to her shift at the Bodha Bar and Restaurant. The night was pretty slow, and she clocked out a little before 10 o'clock. When her shift was over, she headed toward her car. Just like most of the other employees, she usually parked on the street. She always parked on the street just behind the restaurant. Reagan had a routine. She would always text her family to tell them she was home safe. Her whole family lived about 1,000 miles away, and the last thing she wanted was for them to worry. That night, however, the text never arrived. This was odd, because she had been messaging her dad just an hour or so before leaving work. Her sister, Mackenzie, sent her a text at around 10:30 that night. The message showed as delivered, but Reagan never responded. For the following 4 hours, Toby repeatedly called and texted, but her phone just rang unanswered. Then, at about 2 in the morning, the calls abruptly stopped going to voicemail. It seemed her phone's battery had finally died. The next morning, everyone grabbed their phones first thing, but there was still nothing, no replies, no missed calls from Reagan. They wondered if she'd been in a car accident on her way home. Or perhaps it was something simple, like she'd crashed at a friend's place and forgotten her charger. As much as they clung to that last possibility, a feeling deep down told them something was wrong. This was completely out of character for Reagan. She would never just ignore a flood of calls and texts, and she would never want to make her family anxious. At the apartment, meanwhile, Kirsten knocked on Reagan's bedroom door. The room was deserted. Her bed was perfectly made, and her book bag was sitting on the floor. Jackie, Madison, and Stephanie confirmed they hadn't heard her return home either, and that's when it hit them, too. A growing, chilling sense of fear. They started messaging people on social media and calling classmates, desperate to find someone who had seen her. Lisa phoned the university, which confirmed that Reagan hadn't attended her morning class. That was all she needed to hear. She ended the call and dialed the police, but the operator told her she couldn't file a missing persons report since she wasn't the last one to see Reagan. The last people to have seen her were her coworkers at the restaurant where she was employed. So, Reagan's roommates headed back to the restaurant. Her manager verified she had been on the schedule that night and had clocked out after her shift was over. And while her car was no longer parked out front, there were indications that she had left in it. He didn't hesitate for a moment. The manager successfully filed the report. So, we had an employee leave after her shift tonight, and she has not been home. Her phone's been turned off. No one can get a hold of her, and she hasn't been back to her place at all. Her mom has been calling, searching for her, and we can't see her car anywhere around the building. While the search was underway, around noon, dispatch got a call from a passerby who sounded extremely distraught. Hello, 911. Yeah, I think there's a body out here. I don't know if this is a prank or what. Please, send someone. Quick, I'm really freaking out. Please, hurry, send somebody. Okay, stay right there, sir. Near a park entrance in Grove City, a man had stumbled upon the naked body of a young woman, partly buried in the snow. When the police got there, they could see right away that she was already gone. She had no purse, no phone, and her clothes were nowhere in sight. She had a small, circular tattoo on her body and a dainty little necklace, but beyond that, there was nothing nearby that could be used to identify her. We're continuing to track a developing story where the body of a young woman was discovered just outside Scioto Grove Metro Park. At this time, authorities have not officially released the identity of the victim. Naturally, as soon as we receive that information, hopefully later today, we will bring it straight to you. This could have been a random act of violence. It's also possible the crime occurred elsewhere, and she was simply left at this location. At about 3 o'clock that afternoon, Reagan's roommates were still at Bodega when they heard that a young woman's body had been discovered. When officers arrived to take the missing person report, they questioned the girls about a small tattoo. The instant they described it, a wave of dread washed over the girls, because Reagan had an identical one. We are also currently covering a case out of OSU where a female student has been reported missing. A statement from the university confirms their awareness of the report and refers all inquiries to the Columbus Police Department. Then, just a couple of hours later, the devastating news that everyone had feared was officially confirmed. The body that was discovered belonged to Reagan Tokes. A missing persons case in Columbus has escalated into a homicide investigation. Police have verified the body found yesterday in a Grove City park is that of an OSU student. 21-year-old Reagan Tokes was last seen on Wednesday night leaving a Short North bar where she was employed. And tonight, our team has coverage with reactions from OSU students and those who work in the Short North. The Columbus Police Missing Persons file states that, according to a Bodega employee, Tokes usually had a bartender escort her to her car but did not when she departed on Wednesday night. Tokes' body was seen by a driver at Scioto Grove Metro Park in Grove City. Investigators are now attempting to piece together a timeline and identify a suspect. Did she ever make it to her vehicle? Niall Woodson suggests it would be incredibly easy for something to go unnoticed on those streets behind Bodega. There is one streetlight here on this block, which, it keeps this spot illuminated. But the entire next block is pitch black. It's just completely dark. There isn't another street lamp for a whole block. So, did this happen here or somewhere else entirely? Was her killer an acquaintance or a complete stranger? If investigators have the answers, they are keeping them close to the vest. Tokes' roommates did inform police that she was feeling down recently after a breakup with an ex-boyfriend, but added that, to their knowledge, the split was amicable. The autopsy later revealed a horrifying truth. Reagan had been sexually assaulted and then shot to death. She had been struck by 2 projectiles, one to the back of the head and a second near the side of her face. The bullets were still embedded within her skull. Medical examiners determined the shots were fired from behind at nearly point-blank range. It was effectively an execution-style murder. Police reported it was still uncertain whether she had been shot where her body was located or if she was killed somewhere else and moved there afterward. Investigators were also unable to find even a single shell casing at the location. The story spread so rapidly that police had trouble controlling the information. And as a result of that, Reagan's sister, Mackenzie, discovered her sister was dead from a post on Instagram. Reagan's mother, Lisa, insisted her daughter had no enemies. She couldn't conceive of a single individual who would want to harm her, let alone perpetrate something so brutal. But in Ohio, something else was on many people's minds. an issue that had already been causing concern in the community for some time. In the weeks preceding Reagan's murder, the area had been rocked by a string of robberies and assaults, with each one feeling more terrifying than the last. People were being ambushed from behind, intimidated, or confronted by an assailant wielding a gun or a knife. The attacker, always masked, would demand their wallets or bags. Residents are on edge tonight following last night's most recent armed robbery. This marks the third assault in this neighborhood in 2 weeks. Every single victim has been a woman. NBC4's Tyler Carter is live in German Village tonight, where residents have organized a safety meeting. Tyler? Yes, that's right, Ellie. Following the latest attack last night, the German Village Society organized a meeting with Columbus Police and residents that is currently underway at their headquarters. They want to understand precisely what is happening in their community. And the residents I spoke to say they are taking these assaults very seriously. I heard someone scream for help, so I bolted outside and half the neighbors were already there. Last night, a little before 10 o'clock, a woman who resides in this German Village neighborhood on Mohawk and Frankfurt Street was attacked and robbed at gunpoint. Columbus police report the woman was taking items out of the trunk of her car when a man came up from behind her and ordered her to hand over her purse. Authorities were unsure of the man's identity or if the attacks were even related to one another, but one question kept surfacing. Could Reagan's murder somehow be tied to those other assaults? One of the women who survived a previous attack later said that the instant she heard about what happened to Reagan, she knew in her gut they had to be connected. She expressed her certainty that her attacker would have killed her as well, given the chance. But detectives had almost no credible leads to substantiate that theory. So the inquiry had to begin with those in Reagan's inner circle, including her ex-boyfriend, Jake. He was quickly flagged as a person of interest, and not just because they had recently separated. Jake had also made a post on Instagram about her passing, and investigators noted that something about it felt off to them. When was the last time you spoke with her? Probably about a week and a half ago. Is that typical? Well, not really. I usually talk to her every single day, but we were sort of on a break. We just didn't really have enough time for each other. We had to concentrate on school. She mentioned it herself in one of her texts. I mean, I'm one of her closest friends. Okay, Jake, let me just ask you this. Why on earth would you write, "I wish you were in a better place"? Well, can I see what I was addressing her as if I don't know, as if she's in heaven. She's not here. People don't often say in a better place when someone was living a good life. Well, no, I understand. But if I were to die today, I know I would go somewhere better. That is just what I believe. So, you're saying you posted on Instagram yesterday, but Reagan's roommates assured police there was absolutely no way Jake had anything to do with it. He cherished her, and in their entire time together, they had never once had a major disagreement. Jake was shattered by what had occurred. He was simply trying to handle the grief the only way he could. In the end, his post turned out to be nothing suspicious whatsoever. It was merely the sincere message of someone who had lost a person he loved dearly. His alibi was solid, and the police continued with their investigation. A security camera inside Bodega had only captured a brief moment of Reagan exiting the building. And in the footage, there was no indication of anyone trailing her or waiting for her nearby. Using license plate recognition software, detectives were finally able to track down Reagan's car. It was parked on a residential street close by. It was apparent someone had made an attempt to torch the vehicle. There were cigarette burns on the exterior, and inside the car hung a powerful odor of gasoline, but the arson attempt had been unsuccessful. This meant investigators could gather several items of evidence. They discovered a few cigarette butts, a gas can, and multiple ATM receipts. All of the items were collected for forensic examination and analysis. The ATM receipts revealed that someone had tried to withdraw large sums of money on several occasions, but the transactions had been denied. Only a single withdrawal for $60 had actually been approved. As detectives awaited further details from the banks, the community was still struggling to comprehend what happened. Many students were now terrified to walk to or from campus alone, thinking, what if I'm next? And in all honesty, neither the university nor the police could say much that would genuinely put people's minds at ease. People in the service industry in the short north are saying they are concerned for their own safety. NBC4's Olivia Feddo is live from the short north tonight and spoke with some of those employees. Olivia, a veteran bartender at Martini's, another restaurant and bar here in the short north, says that the service industry workers in this area are a very tight-knit group. So, it goes without saying they were devastated to hear that one of their own who worked right here at Bodega was missing and later found deceased. I spoke to that woman earlier today, and again, she has been a bartender for a long time. She says that while she normally takes public transportation to get to her shift, a lot of servers and bartenders around here drive to work, and many of them are forced to park a considerable distance from their jobs. I mean, parking is a real problem down there. And it is a safety problem because a lot of these places where we're parking are not lit up, you know. Many of these, public parking areas are not well illuminated, you know. And so it can be a safety risk for us. And she in no way deserved any kind of harm to come to her, you know. So please, if anyone has information, please come forward because, you know, we need to find justice for Reagan. She was one of those people you meet and just, you don't forget. There have been a lot of hugs, a lot of tears. It's a tragic situation, but it truly highlights just how connected we all are to one another. She was such a kind, wonderful, and radiant person. I recall she was a student at OSU and had an incredible spirit. So incredibly warm and friendly, it makes you think, this kind of thing just doesn't happen around here. I was up the entire night, I'm not exaggerating. It's literally the only thing that's been on my mind. The missing vehicle belonging to Reagan Tokes was discovered on Columbus's east side, over on Oakwood Avenue. Grove City Police are being assisted in this case by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, who are appealing to the public for any leads. If you have any information, you're urged to contact the Ohio BCI tip line. Jake organized a fundraiser for the Tokes family, hoping the money could one day be used to create a scholarship in Reagan's honor. She had such a deep affection for her university and was absolutely beaming about her upcoming graduation. Jake was certain she would have wanted some of those funds to help a fellow student. Before long, donations climbed to nearly $100,000. 2 days following the discovery of Reagan's body, investigators finally had their first major lead in the investigation. Security footage from the ATMs listed on the receipts confirmed that Reagan herself was the one taking out the cash at those precise times. And although it was impossible to see who was in the car with her, detectives felt strongly that another person was inside that vehicle. They believed this individual was likely forcing Reagan to comply. Not long after, the DNA results from the cigarette butts arrived. The speed at which the lab returned the analysis was a surprise to them. But the reason was simple. The DNA was a match for someone already in the police database, a 29-year-old man with a lengthy criminal record named Brian Lee Golsby. He had been released from prison just a few months earlier. He was well known to the police from a variety of other cases, and the more investigators learned about Brian's past, the more unsettling it became. He had a history of criminal behavior stretching back to his childhood, and at this stage, he was a registered Level 3 sex offender. An evaluation from the Ohio Department of Youth Services noted that as a teen, he had assaulted 5-year-old girls and 6-year-old boys, and his violent acts continued. In 2011, he abducted an 8 months pregnant woman and her 2-year-old son, held them with a knife, and assaulted her in full view of her child. He ordered her to drive to various ATMs and empty her account. Next, he had her drive to her own home, where he assaulted her a second time. His next move was to eliminate evidence. He made the woman shower and clean her teeth. Then he snatched some of her things and vanished. However, what they found inside the car provided sufficient grounds to press charges. But there was a complication. The victim's trauma was so severe she was unable to testify. As a result, Brian was offered a deal. The initial charges were for 2 armed robberies, kidnapping, and rape. But in the end, he only pleaded guilty to robbery and attempted rape. He received a sentence of 6 years behind bars, but was ultimately released a few months ahead of schedule. Once freed, he was assigned to a supervised group home, but neither the program staff nor his probation officer monitored him as closely as required. This was despite him being classified as a high-risk offender with a full-time ankle monitor. He repeatedly ignored the conditions of his supervision. Upon examining the information from his ankle monitor, it became painfully obvious that a series of assaults and thefts in the weeks before Reagan's murder were all linked to Brian. It all connected, and the public was genuinely shocked to learn that ankle monitor data isn't directly sent to law enforcement. Typically, that data goes to the private corporations who make the devices first, and they are then responsible for relaying it. In this situation, that protocol either failed to work as intended or no one was reviewing the incoming data. To make matters worse, his monitor had no curfew restriction attached to it whatsoever. The data from Brian's ankle monitor placed him at every single location Reagan had been that night. From her car's parking spot to every street and each ATM, everything traced back to him, a timeline confirmed by security footage. In addition, detectives uncovered surveillance video of him buying a gas can, the exact same one later recovered from Reagan's car. The results from the rape kit also came back, providing another DNA match to Brian Golsby. On February 11th at 4 in the morning, a SWAT unit breached his residence and took him into custody. You got a cuff on him? Yeah. Got him secured fast. You can chat about whatever, but if he starts asking questions, just tell him that Nick is going to speak with him, and leave it at that. Right. What followed was a grueling 6-hour interrogation with the very same detectives who had cuffed him 6 years earlier. Brian appeared distraught, adamantly denying he had any involvement in Reagan's death or sexual assault. He only admitted to being inside her car, insisting that a robbery was his sole intention. He recounted how he had muscled his way into her vehicle and commanded her to drive to several ATMs. He then claimed he directed her to a park, where he told her to get undressed, turn her back, and wait for 30 minutes before leaving. After that, he said, he just sped off in her car and ditched it later on. He maintained that Reagan was very much alive when he drove away. Police questioned him about potential accomplices, hoping to catch him in a lie if he tried to shift the blame. The moment detectives presented the DNA evidence, his whole story began to unravel. Suddenly, he admitted he was there when Reagan was shot, but he still swore he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. He blamed it all on a man named TJ, to whom he allegedly owed money. Brian explained that after they'd gotten the money from Reagan, he thought they were just going to let her go. But he claimed TJ then forced him to assault her, and that TJ himself aimed the gun at her. Why do you think he did that? The detectives probed. Brian said he had no idea, but claimed TJ had made threats against his children. He felt he had no other option but to comply in order to protect his family. He described Reagan crying, repeating over and over, "I just want to live." In Brian's new version of events, TJ ordered Reagan to remove her clothes and walk into the field. He then claimed that TJ shot her in the back of the head. Afterward, this man supposedly stepped closer, stood over her, and fired a second shot towards the side of her face. He gave me the same gun while he was on the ground. The story he spun about that night, down to the exact words he claimed Reagan spoke, was so vivid that the officers had an instant realization. He wasn't talking about somebody else. He was confessing to his own actions. Investigators discovered no forensic evidence inside Reagan's car that indicated a second person, besides Brian, had ever been there, and he failed to provide any concrete information about the shadowy figure he called TJ. Officers pointed out that Brian's criminal past spoke for itself. Every single crime he'd committed in the preceding weeks, he had done by himself. His account was a mess of inconsistencies, but the detectives played along, hoping he would reveal even more, and their strategy worked. He ultimately told them the location of Reagan's hidden clothing, where he had tossed the gun, and where the shell casings were. He also told them where they could find her phone. Lieutenant Brian Davidson, who led the interrogation, later commented that he saw pure evil in his eyes. As he put it, there was just nothing there. 29-year-old Brian Golsby was charged with aggravated murder, rape, armed robbery, and the kidnapping of Reagan Tokes, a fourth-year psychology student at Ohio State. The news broke on the Grove City Police Department's Facebook page on Saturday morning. Brian Lee Golsby has been arrested and charged with aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated robbery. Golsby had a history with law enforcement, having already served prison time for one robbery and one attempted rape conviction. Police stated they suspected a connection between Golsby and other recent attacks around the German Village neighborhood. Our thoughts are with the Tokes family and her friends today as they begin the difficult process of healing. Despite all of his denials, Brian later placed 2 calls from jail, one to his girlfriend and another to a friend. And in those conversations, he came clean about everything. "I did it. I killed that girl for the money." With that confession, police pieced together a clear timeline of that night's horrific events, starting at 9:45 that evening. Right as Reagan was leaving her work shift, Brian ambushed her, forced her into her car, and ordered her to drive to an ATM. At 9:58, Reagan pulled into a Chase bank and attempted to withdraw $500 for Brian, but the transaction failed. About 10 minutes later, they showed up at a Huntington bank, where security footage once more captured Reagan trying to withdraw cash. That transaction also did not go through. Sometime between 10:18 and 10:30 that night, Brian forced Reagan to park in a secluded alley where he sexually assaulted her. Afterward, he made her drive back to the first bank to successfully withdraw $60. Between 11:12 and 11:41 p.m., cameras at a gas station again recorded the 2 of them parked in her car. Sometime between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning, they made their way to Scioto Grove Metro Park. There, he made her take off her clothes and start walking out into a dark, open field. As she pleaded for her life, he fired 2 shots into her head, then used her own car to escape. He went to his girlfriend's home, and at about 1:45 in the morning, they drove to a McDonald's, likely to establish an alibi. He later got rid of the weapon and casings by dropping them in a sewer, followed by a failed attempt to set Reagan's vehicle on fire. In another disturbing development, Brian presented Reagan's wallet to his girlfriend, claiming it was a premature Valentine's Day gift. A week after the Ohio State senior was last seen, her loved ones gathered for their final farewells. This memorial, this celebration of her life, was an opportunity to remember the Reagan everyone knew and cherished, not the sudden, brutal manner in which her story ended. Friends recall her as a wonderful, deeply caring, and joyful individual. From the service in Maumee to a graveside ceremony in nearby Perrysburg, Reagan Tokes was laid to rest. Across the state of Ohio, people felt a profound connection to Reagan Tokes and her family. An online memorial book was filled with comments, like this one from a woman in Grove City. "While I never had the chance to know her, this story has deeply moved me. My heart is breaking for all of you, and most of all, for Reagan." On February 15th, Reagan's funeral service was held at the church she had attended since she was a child. The sanctuary was filled to capacity with people who had known her for years alongside others who had never met her at all. When Brian was led into court to hear the official charges, Toby watched him from behind the glass. He later reflected that he was so furious, emotional, and overwhelmed that he was amazed he didn't suffer a heart attack that day. According to Toby, as more of Brian's past came to light, it was more than just shocking. It was nearly incomprehensible how he had evaded any real accountability for such a long time. They had a monster in their grasp, completely under their control, and they still let him slip through the cracks. The man accused of the assault and murder of OSU student Reagan Tokes pleaded not guilty. In spite of his confessions and the mountain of evidence against him, Brian refused to formally admit guilt, and trial preparations began. 3 months after her death, the day she had worked so hard for had finally come: graduation day. For the university and its students, it was a moment that felt both heartbreaking and deeply meaningful. We will also never forget the classmates taken from us far too soon, who helped to shape our hearts and our minds. and the degree of Bachelor of Arts is conferred upon Reagan Delaney Tokes. In her place, Reagan's family walked across the stage and accepted her diploma, which was awarded posthumously. You could feel the weight of the moment in the room as everyone rose to their feet for a prolonged standing ovation. In a public statement, her family shared that Reagan had dreamed of becoming a Buckeye ever since she was a little girl. And today, that dream was realized when she received her diploma from the Ohio State University. As her parents and family, we are so incredibly proud of her and all she accomplished. The chance to get a higher education is an incredible gift. But that gift must be matched with the desire, the dedication, the discipline, and the perseverance to see it through. Reagan had every one of those qualities, and frankly, even more. And that same thing is true for every student graduating here today. We congratulate all of them on this accomplishment, and we ask them to take that gift and help make the world a better place, the kind of world Reagan hoped for, but can no longer create herself. In mid-March of 2018, Brian's trial commenced. The jurors began their day outside the courthouse. They were escorted to the locations where investigators say Brian Golsby, a known felon, abducted, assaulted, and murdered the Ohio State student. Prosecutors argued this jury tour would help illustrate the terror Reagan Tokes must have felt on the night she went missing from her job in the short north. Jurors were also brought to the locations of 2 ATMs, where investigators allege Brian Golsby had forced Tokes to attempt a withdrawal. They visited the alley in German Village, where prosecutors believe Reagan Tokes was assaulted, and Scioto Grove Metro Park, where her body was discovered. A temporary memorial at the site had been concealed with a tarp during the jury's visit. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Back inside the courtroom, prosecutors called the witnesses who had been the first to arrive on the scene where the body was found. Also testifying were several of Reagan's roommates, who recounted filing a missing persons report once they knew Reagan hadn't come home. And an undercover detective from Grove City detailed his discovery of a cigarette butt and burn marks within Reagan Tokes' car. Prosecutors revealed that the DNA from that cigarette butt was a perfect match to Brian Golsby. The detective also recounted the first interrogation with Brian Golsby following his capture. For the first few hours, his story was that he'd forced Reagan into a car and robbed her because he was desperate for cash. He claimed he drove her to several ATMs and then abandoned her, unclothed, in a field during a blizzard. Given the mountain of evidence against him, his defense team was in an impossible position. The prosecution's case was airtight. So, their primary tactic was to persuade the jury to spare him the death penalty, especially since he had already confessed. Therefore, the trial was never really about establishing his innocence. It was purely a fight to save his life. The defense highlighted his turbulent upbringing, mentioning that his mother was abusive and that he had a history of addiction. They further asserted that he had been a victim of childhood sexual abuse, though prosecutors pointed out his story was full of inconsistencies. His lawyer also contended that the DNA discovered in Reagan's body and on cigarette butts was questionable, as it was matched to Brian's profile from a 2010 case. She further suggested Brian wasn't mentally capable of deliberately planning a crime as heinous as this one. I feel the need to point something out here. If Mr. Golsby was genuinely trying to avoid being caught, perhaps wearing a GPS ankle monitor was not his best idea. And on top of that, he was diligent about keeping it charged. He made sure the device never died, but the prosecution argued his intelligence level was irrelevant. They told the jury he was a predator hunting that night, and Reagan Tokes was his prey. There isn't any mystery to solve here. The prosecution said, "We can track his every move." At 9:45 p.m., he was at the exact spot she parked her car, where she was forced inside at gunpoint. This device logs not just his position, but also his speed. And just a couple of minutes after 9:45, his speed jumped from a walking pace of 3 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour on 2nd Avenue, right after he abducted her and ordered her to drive to a bank. There, an attempt to get $200 was denied because, as we know, ATMs have withdrawal limits. In the end, $60 was successfully withdrawn by Reagan Tokes, and there is security footage of her at the drive-thru. A shadowy figure can be seen in the vehicle alongside her. The person's identity is unclear, but guess what? At 10:32 p.m., that is precisely where Brian Lee Golsby is located. So now, $60 has been taken from the bank. Sometime later, there's another attempt to get cash from that bank and then a Huntington bank just a short way from there. And once again, when those declined attempts were being made, Brian V. Golsby is present at both locations. The state, unlike the defense, has this chance to tell you exactly what we are going to prove. We fully intend to prove each and every count in the indictment and all specifications, proving them beyond a reasonable doubt. And we also expect, in our closing argument, to demonstrate to you that we have proven it beyond that required standard. We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled and sworn, find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of count 1 in the indictment for aggravated murder. On the day that would have been Reagan's 23rd birthday, Brian was convicted on all 9 counts against him, but the jury was deadlocked when it came to his punishment. 4 jurors were in favor of life in prison, while 8 voted for capital punishment. At that moment, Brian addressed the Tokes family directly, saying, "Today, I would like to apologize to the Tokes family for the crimes I committed against their daughter, friends, and family. When I was first brought in, I lied about absolutely everything. I said TJ did it. There is no TJ. He is not real. I made him up. I was trying to find a way out of the crime I committed. But the only other thing I want to say is, please have mercy on me. All right, you can be seated." Brian received 3 life sentences to be served consecutively without parole eligibility. Later, an additional 66 years were added to his prison time for the assaults and armed robberies he carried out just days before Reagan's murder. He was transferred to the Ohio State Penitentiary, a maximum security facility, to serve his sentence. His legal team initiated several appeals, but they were all ultimately dropped or dismissed. Franklin County Prosecutor Ron O'Brien was unsatisfied with this result. He was convinced the death penalty was the only justifiable sentence and continued to advocate for that outcome. In 2018, he presented a 53-page motion requesting the court authorize a cross-appeal. The case was built around the instructions the judge had provided the jury, which permitted them to consider mitigating factors the defense had raised. Even though the prosecution contended that no genuine mitigating circumstances had actually been proven, once the jury is incorrectly told that, so I believe we've proven our case was impaired and we've shown that prejudice prevented fair consideration during the penalty phase. Throughout his interrogations, Brian gave multiple conflicting accounts of what took place that evening. His narratives were frequently inconsistent, and the prosecution had little trouble disproving many of his claims. Nevertheless, those statements were still permitted as evidence during the court proceedings. Finally, in April of 2019, Ohio's 10th District Court of Appeals gave the state the green light to file an appeal. The court, however, also affirmed that the judge's instructions to the jury had been proper and legally sound. The prosecutor pursued another appeal, but much to his frustration, it was ultimately rejected outright by the Ohio Supreme Court. Ronald O'Brien tried to stay optimistic, stating, "The good news is he's going to die in prison." After the system's shortcomings and failures were exposed, Reagan's family vowed to fight for reform, saying, "The system has serious flaws, and change is not just necessary. It will happen as a result of this senseless tragedy. If we have to, we will dedicate the rest of our lives to making sure it does." And they absolutely meant it. In 2018, the family settled a lawsuit with the firm tasked with housing and supervising Brian. The following year, in 2019, the Reagan Tokes Law officially took effect, and the Ohio Supreme Court later affirmed its constitutionality. In the years that came after, it became painfully obvious that inadequate supervision, a lack of proper monitoring, and the failure to send Brian back to prison for his violations all pointed to a desperate need for sweeping reforms in both the law and the correctional system. The Reagan Tokes Law enables courts to hand down indefinite prison terms with minimum and maximum lengths for first- and second-degree felonies not already requiring life imprisonment. During Brian's time in prison, he has broken prison rules 52 times, which has caused him to be shuffled between 5 different correctional institutions. Yet, under the existing Ohio law, none of those infractions affected his sentence whatsoever. And what's even more troubling is that he had once been released from prison 6 months early. Under the new legislation, the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction is now empowered to extend a prisoner's sentence up to the court-ordered maximum if that individual commits new offenses or repeatedly breaks prison rules. The law is also intended to strengthen the way released offenders are supervised, including the mandatory use of electronic ankle bracelets. As a result of a fundraiser Jake organized and many generous contributions, the Reagan Delaney Tokes Memorial Foundation Scholarship was born. Every single year, the foundation gives 2 Ohio State students financial aid to cover both their tuition and their housing. In Reagan's honor, self-defense classes have also started to be offered all over the region. The session is a combination of fighting techniques and self-defense strategies. It's 1 minute dedicated to a combat skill, then 1 minute on a powerful strength-building move. A special tribute was also created for her at Scioto Grove Metro Park. A memorial for 21-year-old Reagan, called the Tranquility Garden, was built there. I used to feel this suffocating pressure, like I couldn't even breathe whenever we drove in. And now, I don't feel that anymore. For us, obviously, the pain and the tragedy will never disappear. It's something we carry with us each day. But we have to find a way to move on. And there is still an amazing, beautiful world out there. We have to learn how to keep going. And we carry her in our hearts every day, and that will never change. Her family wanted the garden to be a place of serenity, not a reminder of the awful events of that morning. Inside the garden, there is a water element that symbolizes her zodiac sign. Her favorite color, blue, is featured prominently throughout the space. The area is also teeming with wildlife and greenery, exactly the type of nature Reagan adored. 5 buckeye trees stand there as well, a nod to her years as a student at Ohio State, a place she considered her absolute favorite in the world. Her former boyfriend, Jake, didn't often speak in public after Reagan's death, but he once shared a memory of their first date that truly captures her spirit. We had gone apple picking, and she laid eyes on the most flawless apple at the very top of a tree. She was determined to get it. The only catch was that neither of us could reach it. Then, a brilliant thought hit me. I told her to hop up onto my shoulders, but before I even understood why that apple meant so much to her, she had pushed it into my mouth and had me take a giant bite. I didn't get why she did it until she later explained that she'd been on a mission to find the biggest, reddest apple possible, just so I could be the one to enjoy it. That was her in a nutshell. She always put other people first. And when I say always, I mean it in every sense of the word. From the very first day I knew her until our final conversation, she consistently inspired me to be better. I will carry my love for her always. She was my closest friend, a title she will hold forever. The terror Reagan must have felt in her last hours is beyond comprehension. It is agonizing to imagine those final moments. Her desperate pleas to live, abandoned in a cold, empty field. No matter who you asked about Reagan, too, you always heard the same things. They spoke of her with immense warmth and respect. She had a profound sense of compassion and a true kindness, always managing to find the good in every person and every situation. A person with such boundless potential to succeed and to lift up others on her journey. As her mother, Lisa, later reflected, "In the final reckoning, love is what ultimately prevails.